It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there! Getting old and senile.
You know, Bert, you and I have been talking about this since February. I'm sorry it's taken so long, but you know,
All right, I had no place to go.
yeah, yeah, we're all, you know, Paul and I are also retired. Paul and I are retired ministers, and we've known each other, God knows what, 30, 40 years, and we've talked about doing this kind of a thing for a long time, and well, Bert, we're having the ball just interviewing all kinds of people. So, Bert, what we do is we're going to tape the show. Gwen is going to edit the show to make sure there's, you know, in case you say something blasphemous towards us or anything like that. But and
to a minister, never.
And then we'll get back to you, and we will sell the show to you for about $20,000. Does that work for you?
I can only do 12.5.
All right, 12.5 is a deal. So we will get back to you as to when we're going to do it, Bert. But thank you again, my buddy, for coming on. Welcome to 10 Times the Terror. And today we have a wonderful guest with us, Burt Metcalfe, who's done some exciting things in being both a producer and an actor. And he's a great guy. He's a great guy unless you're a neighbor to him and there's a monster on Maple Street. Then he's not such a nice guy. But other than that, I think you're going to find him a charming person to talk to. So, Bert, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, yeah, we can't wait to talk with you about some of the things you've done that you know, you've had an incredible career. I mean, I know we've talked before, and you know, your story is a wonderful story because you started out from a very humble beginning and wound up doing an amazing show that, you know, you don't have to tell anyone. Do you know or do you remember the show MASH? Because obviously it was one of the great series, and you were behind that. So you have an amazing story. But if we can begin, just you know, give us a little background to who Burt Metcalfe was growing up and how you even got into this crazy business.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Canada. I'm a Canadian by birth. I lived most of my Canadian life in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada, on the East Coast, and I was very fortunate in that my mother and my father had died when I was 3, but when I was 14, she decided to move to California, and so that was the beginning of my career as an actor. I got into television and did a lot of shows, including a series called Father of the Bride. But by the mid 60s, I was 30 years old, and I decided I'd had enough. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life waiting for the phone to ring, and so I decided to go and see a lot of people that I knew and I had worked with, to tell them I was interested in trying to get a job in production. And so in 1965, Jackie Cooper, who was a wonderful friend, and I had done his show, Hennessy, several times, he said, we don't have anything right now, but I was interested in casting, anything to get a foot in the door. And 6 months later, he called and said, do you still want to do this? Because we got an opening, and we would hire you. And just the week before, I'd done an episode of The Fugitive in which I had a wonderful part, the best money and billing that I'd ever had as a freelance actor. And but I decided I was on a little bit of an uptick, but there were plenty of downturns to come, and I didn't want to have to deal with that anymore. So at the age of 30 in 1965, I went to work as a casting director for Screen Gems, which was the television subsidiary of Columbia Pictures. and that's where it started on the production side. In 1970, I went to 20th Century Fox because a friend who I'd known as an actor, Gene Reynolds, was going to do the pilot of MASH and Anna and the King, and with Yul Brynner. Did I want to come and do 2 shows, 2 pilots? If they didn't sell, I was out of a job. But I decided, yes, I'll definitely try to do this. And Anne and the King lasted 13 weeks with Yul Brynner, and MASH and After MASH lasted 13 years. In the last 6 years, I produced the show alone. Gene Reynolds left. Larry Gelbart had preceded him in leaving at the end of 4 seasons. So from the 6th through 11, I was executive producer, ran the show, directed 35 episodes, and had a marvelous time in a very unique setting because it was a wonderful group of actors, and we had very special material to do, and that's how it evolved.
It must be pretty incredible, when you talk to people, even to this day, and you're talking about what you did before you retired, and somebody says, I was the assistant manager over at Home Depot. What did you do, Burt? I produced the TV show MASH.
Yeah.
Yeah, I must raise some eyebrows, right?
I was very fortunate to have come to that job when Gelbart and Reynolds had both left. They vouched for me. I was very fortunate in that they said, "Don't hire anybody outside to come in and produce the show because Burt can do it." And they fostered that confidence in the studio, and they let me do it. And fortunately, things went well. So, but with a cast like that and with material like that, I was very fortunate to inherit it, and I knew the show well, and so things continued to go well. That was fortunate.
Paul, you had a question for Burt about the show. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to comment on the fact that the closing episode of MASH is one of the high points in television history, and
That's right.
absolutely wrenching. The death of the so-called chicken. That was so incredibly powerful. What do you remember about that episode? I mean, that just blew everybody away.
Well, that was a very interesting time because the year before, I had an invitation, and my wife and I went to Korea. A diplomat in L.A., a Korean diplomat, who we'd begun to talk to frequently about accuracy and things being authentic in terms of Korean culture and customs. And he said, would you like to come to Korea? I'm going back, and I could be there, and I'd be your guide. Come and visit us there. Well, that was a terrific chance to kind of see the country firsthand. And the story of the woman smothering her baby to avoid the crying from a North Korean patrol. That story was given to me by somebody in Korea who I interviewed, and coming back with it, we saved it to begin that 2.5-hour special. The irony of that story is that it was near the beginning of the trip, and I had several more people to interview while I was there. And some of them would ask me, "Well, what have you learned about our country and about the war and all of that?" And I would say I was just astonished and appalled by the story of the woman who smothered the baby, and almost all of them said, "Oh yeah, well, I had a story where this happened and that person got killed, or this and that." It was taken as a matter of course to them that these horrors took place, and so anyway, yes, that was a very powerful moment, and Alan Alda did a wonderful job of acting in it and of directing it, and we were fortunate. I had told CBS it was to be 2 hours, a 2-hour movie, the typical length, and I said there had been a fire there, and now we had to deal with all the elements of the fire out at the Fox Ranch where we filmed the exteriors. And so I said, look, we can easily go 2.5 hours if you're interested. And they said, oh, great, yeah, we'd love that. So that's how it came to be 2.5. And yes, it was a very powerful show. And it still is to this day the highest rated content show. Yes, the Super Bowl and things like that, sporting events exceeded it. But in terms of a show that has dramatic or comedic content, MASH holds the record. I don't know if you know any of these stories, but it was interesting where on the night that it played all over the country, restaurants were empty and the movies were empty because everybody was home watching the show.
So, Burt, doing that kind of responsibility, I mean, everybody thinks it's all glamour and wow, you're making big money. And of course, you must have said to yourself, wow, I finally made it. But what's involved to do that? I mean, it must be a huge responsibility for someone.
It is, but if you've been doing it for, at that point, 11 years, you're lucky in that you have a certain rhythm and confidence and comfort that says, after so many prior episodes, we can do this, and we can definitely come up with a story that's going to be very significant. We wanted everybody to get a chance to say goodbye to each other, to one another, and then ultimately, of course, that's how it ends with a goodbye to all the people in America. So it was definitely a challenge, no doubt about it. But we had a lot of very good elements and wonderful actors and good writing. The whole writing staff participated, and individually. So it all worked out. It was a very exciting time.
How did the cast respond once they saw the script?
Oh yeah, they were all very much in favor of it because, like you're saying, it hits you that incident to begin the show of the mother killing the baby, and of course Alan, carried it off beautifully, and the actors were very confident in the material, and so we were looking forward to producing it, putting it together, and getting it into a finished product. It was a very challenging and special time.
I would think that when they were envisioning the show at the very beginning, a lot of people were saying, look, we don't want this to be another Hogan's Heroes kind of show, right?
Yeah, well, we were the ones who primarily said that. The example of McHale's Navy, because Gene Reynolds had directed many of the episodes of Hogan's Heroes, so we didn't want to tarnish his reputation by using that as the example. But McHale's Navy, we didn't want all those zany doctors up at the front. What great comedic characters they are. We wanted to say this is a war, and sure there'll be some crazy elements to it that are comedic, but because that was the way it was, that was true. But at the same time, there's a war going on and people are dying, and we wanted to be able to deal with all of that. We wanted the whole spectrum. We didn't want to just play out kind of the crazy antics of those whoopee doctors. We were able to interview, probably a couple hundred doctors who all over the country who had served in Korea, who were in medical units all over Korea. And they gave us marvelous, true experiences that were so helpful in putting the show together. You can have the most talented writers in the world, and certainly Larry Gelbart is at the top of that. But to have had some of the experiences that take place in reality, no writer can conceive of. And so before the series ever began, we found a doctor out here at UCLA in the UCLA Medical School who had served in Korea, and we had an interview with him, and a wonderful conversation one evening. And then when we were getting ready to leave, we said, "Can you give us the name of any doctors you served with?" So he said, "Oh, well, yeah, there's Dr. So-and-so, and I think he lives in Kansas City now." And so we would get in touch with him. And every time this would seem to happen constantly. Every time you would call the doctor's office somewhere in the country and get ready to record the conversation, and I would say what I'm all about, and it's the MASH television show, and we wanted to interview him, and whoever answered the phone, the nurse, the assistant, whatever, associate, would always say, "Well, gee, I don't know, Dr. So-and-so is a very busy man. I don't know if he's going to be able to do something like this." I said, "Well, that's perfectly understandable, but just tell him that we got his name from Dr. So-and-so in California, and he thought that your doctor might be interested in doing this." And every time the answer was the same, where the person who answered the phone would come back and say, "Well, yes, actually, Dr. So-and-so would like to do this. If you can do it Thursday night or Saturday morning, whatever, he will take part." And we would have the call recorded and then put into manuscript form. And we would go through it and underline, and there'd be such rich stuff that you would find that was just invaluable. It was the most fertile area for us in terms of stories, the experiences that these guys had had. And it was interesting also that the doctors, when you get to talk to them for the interview, you couldn't shut them up because nobody listens or was interested in, or they didn't want to talk about it, stuff with their families. That's a very common characteristic of veterans after a war, that they don't really talk about it much. But these guys did, and it was cathartic for them, and they were enormously helpful in doing 11 years of stories. And in the later years, I would have a doctor who I'd talk to, and he'd say, "I got a great story for you," and he'd tell it to me, and then I'd say, "Oh, we did that in the 4th year, or we did it in the 7th season," whatever. And it was that kind of thing. We began saying so often, "Oh, we did that, we did this, we did that." And we knew we were getting to a time where we were considering ending the show, because you don't want to hang around too long. You don't want to be a kind of punch-drunk fighter who finally gets knocked out in the 10th inning. So, 10th round. So anyway, that was the story about how helpful all those medical guys were. And my wife and I went to a reunion in Chicago, in about the 8th season, let's say. And we went to a gathering of a unit of doctors who'd been in Korea together. And I had a doctor come up and tell me something that I've always remembered. He said, "I want to thank you for making me a hero to my family and to my neighborhood." He said, "because my kids began to realize that, I was sort of a bit like Hawkeye or any of those other doctors, and that was the experience. And it also helped him open up. And then the kids would bring over all the neighboring kids and say, this is my dad. He was Hawkeye." And it was a very sweet observation about how the show had affected this doctor's life. So
that's great. Yeah. Could we? I wonder if we could just shift. I'm thinking of our time. We have so much we want to cover. Can we talk about the famous Twilight Zone episode, the monsters that landed on Maple Street?
Twilight
and
Zone.
You were in that, right?
Yes.
And what do you remember about
Twilight
that?
Zone? Well, I remember that it was a terrific part, and that I was thrilled to do it. I got the part. leading up to that, I was a bit of a struggling actor, and more than a bit, a struggling actor, and I was working part-time for a messenger service, a courier service. You'd pick up contracts at the studio, and you'd take them to somebody's home, so things like that. A part-time job. It was a good job because you could call in any time and say, I can't come in today or tomorrow, whatever. And the woman who was casting the show, she found out that I was doing that, and she sympathized with me in terms of not sitting home, but having a part-time job. And I'd worked for her before, but this was a really much better part than anything I'd done, and so that was what was really exciting about it. I had gone to Rod Serling's home, although that had nothing to do with the casting, several times to deliver contracts or to pick up stuff from him to take to the studio. And I had gotten to know him a little bit. I mean, just to say hello. But it was a very interesting episode, and we knew it was special. And it's sort of on those, kind of a cavalcade of Twilight Zone episodes. They'll run maybe 15 of them in a row, like a film festival. And so it's one of the classics. Whenever they have one of those exhibits, it's always included. And it was a very good show. But that's what I remember about the Twilight Zone. I used to wear a jacket when I was working and when I would go to the studio because I had a shirt on that had a Red Arrow Messenger logo on it, and I didn't want people to know I was there not to work as an actor, but because of my part-time job. And so I would wear a jacket on a hot day. I'd be wearing a sport jacket over the shirt so that I wouldn't have to have people know that. The funny things you can remember about your career, that was 1960. So that's 61 years ago that I did that. I'm a spring chicken of 86 right now.
Oh, wonderful. Praise the Lord for that. Well, certainly in the age of conspiracy theories, that show only becomes more relevant, more telling, right?
Yes. You mean the Twilight Zone?
Yes, yeah. The monsters landing on Maple Street, with all these.
Yes, and then the camera pulling back, and you realize that you're inside a spaceship with a group of aliens, and they're saying, "You see, this is what I mean. We don't have to come down and fight and struggle. They'll fight between themselves and take over when it's done." That was the whole message of the show. That mob violence and suspicion and yes, the conspiracy stuff would take over and hand the aliens without ever having to go to battle. Yeah.
So, Burt, we've had a number of people and still have some people that are going to come on the Twilight Zone episodes, and they all say the same thing. They say, that was such a hot show. Everybody wanted to get in on that show because it was done so well.
Yes, absolutely.
And you were very fortunate. Even when you got some of these small parts, you wound up getting into something that, is a cult classic. And so if someone says, who Burt Metcalfe is, they might not know the name, but you say, he's that guy, he was that guy, and they mentioned something of a show, and suddenly, oh, wow, So I'm thinking now of your other part that you kind of stumbled into, which was the Outer Limits, which was the, you got to be on the very first episode, the pilot.
Yes,
and I got to tell you, you did a great job. You screwed up when you brought the monster into the planet, but you did a great job on that. What was your name on that? Do you remember?
My character's name?
Yeah.
No, I don't remember that.
But it'll come back to me. But that's a wonderful.
Yeah, but I was a guy who fooled around with the electronic keyboard, the console, and the monster came out of the electricity that I had furnished it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very powerful episode too.
Yeah, I had some very good parts as a freelance actor. I mentioned to you earlier about The Fugitive, if you remember that series as well.
Sure.
I was in a feature film called The Bridges at Toko-Ri with William Holden and Grace Kelly, Frederick March. I mean, it was a big budget film. I had a really small role, but I went through a lot of it. And then I also had the good fortune during a hiatus period. By the time I was a casting director, and the last James Bond movie, the one with the last one that Sean Connery did, rather, called Diamonds Are Forever, was shot in Las Vegas, and I got a part in that, and I worked in Vegas for 6 weeks, off and on, and that was a lot of fun to do because I had a room there in the Flamingo Hotel that I could keep, and I would go back and forth to L.A. and never have to unpack and take more than my toothbrush, you know. So Diamonds Are Forever, the last one that Sean Connery did, yeah. I don't want to start reeling off credits that nobody's ever going to have heard of, but I did a lot of different shows. Jackie Cooper I had worked for on his series called Hennessy. I had a recurring role on 12 O'Clock High, which was about the Air Force. I actually made a living. I did pretty well for a while, up and down. And then I was under contract to MGM to do Father of the Bride. I played the groom. And that had been done as a major movie years before with Spencer Tracy and Elizabeth Taylor. But then the problem was after Father of the Bride went off the air, because I was making good money on that too. But the following year I made half of that, and then the following year I made half of that, and that took me up to when I was 30 in 1965, saying that enough is enough. I'm not going to. And it's difficult because you're giving up your dream. I thought. I didn't realize that the dream was only going to be improved and by going in the other direction, and then ultimately, of course, with MASH, that I was going to have this marvelous future after I had given up acting, which I thought was the end of my life. So all in all, it went well.
Well, you know, I've seen pictures of you when you were a young man on the Twilight Zone. You were an extremely handsome guy. I mean, you could have been a model, I think, if you had wanted to.
Oh well,
and you know, I'm serious. I've seen some.
I'll send you a big check because that's very kind.
That's understood. But I've seen some recent pictures of you, and I've seen your wife, and she's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, well, she thinks I'm quite handsome, and my mother did. and so yeah, I guess in a small circle, I was lucky. I was tall. I'm still tall, but I'm not as tall as I was. Yeah, okay, thank you. It's a nice compliment.
Herman, I got a little clip here I saved for you, so hold on. I think I have. Yeah, here we go.
Please stay tuned for Eddie Phillips' record review.
Eddie Phillips.
Edward, you got it.
Many thanks, Gene, and my congratulations to your brother Alan on his testimonial shindig tonight. He's made KXKVI the beacon of the Southwest, and all of you in the Maxwell family deserve a big round of applause. We start off this evening's celebration with a musical salute to the Maxwells. Brother Alan, the electronic wizard, and Brother Gene Buddy Maxwell, your favorite DJ in the desert area. Here we are with the Deuces in the Trays singing Big Time Daddy.
There you go, Big Time Daddy.
Yeah. So that was my name, Eddie Phillips.
You could have been a DJ.
Yeah. That's funny. It's funny to hear that because I'm thinking that isn't even me. That's somebody else. He's gonna eventually. I'll come on, but there it is. You didn't even recognize my own voice.
Well, as you look back over the years, you've been very blessed. Do you have a personal faith that you ascribe to that you think has guided you in all those years?
Well, that's a very interesting question, particularly coming from a minister.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that, but I did have a confidence, I guess, that I was good, that I had some talent. I think much of it had to do with when my father died, and I did have a lot of aunts and uncles, and they would have family dinners, and we'd all get together. And over the years, I started entertaining at family dinners. I would do imitations and dialects, and I would mime to records. Danny Kaye was a great favorite, and it was the kind of thing where I felt that I was becoming aware of this talent because I was the cousin who didn't have a father, and so I was being able to compete with all the more affluent family cousins in terms of entertaining, and that's how I got interested in being an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I always did kind of say, "Look at me, Dad. Here's where I am. I know you can see what's going on here." You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I think at least for Paul and my own feelings is that I also have a heavenly Father watching over me. That my life is not just a number of coincidences, but you've had a purpose in your life that you fulfilled, and I think you have done a wonderful job, and we're very proud of you and all that you've done, Burt. And we just can't thank you enough for coming on our show, sharing a little bit about your life.
My great pleasure. So I thank you for your time, and I hope the show is good and that you're pleased with it, and that the audience is pleased. So where are you now? Where am I talking to you?
Well, I'm in Vegas, and my co-host Paul is in New Jersey.
I'm in New Jersey, yeah.
Where in New Jersey?
Actually, Little Falls. I was in Montclair for many years. We just retired about a month and a half ago.
The reason I was asking is I did a summer stock tour with Walter Pidgeon. I played his son in a play called Tango. This was 1963. This was a couple of years before I decided to leave acting. But we played at the Paper Mill Playhouse in Millburn.
Oh, sure. Yeah, know it well.
Yeah. And it was a wonderful summer. That was a highlight also of my quote career, and playing with him. We played at the Westport Playhouse in Westport, Connecticut, and Coconut Grove in Florida, and a lot of other really nice summer stock theaters. There was a terrific 3-month tour that summer of '63.
Well, you give our regards to Eddie Phillips, okay?
Yes, I will. I certainly will.
We love you, Burt. Thank you for coming on.
Talking to you, Ralph. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Great to have you, Burt. Right.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 times the terror.
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Ralph, you're well intentioned, but clearly wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.